Okay, the never-ending lesson. This is video 4 on slope-intercept form. So one thing that we haven't really talked about, but you might have noticed, is that every single equation that we've been working with so far is in that same format, y equals mx plus b. That is convenient, but not unfortunately always the way that the equations are given to you. So sometimes if you are given an equation and it's not in the y equals mx plus b form, we need to rewrite it so that it is. And then we can graph it or answer other questions, find the slope, find the y-intercept. So in this video, I'm just going to just show you how to solve the equation so that it's in the right format, which we call it solving for y. So that what that means is we get y on one side by itself and everything else on the other side of the equation. So you're going to need to remember kind of rules for solving equations that we did several months ago. The only difference with these is that you're not going to get an answer like, for example, like we used to get like x equals 5. You're not going to get an answer like that. You're going to get an equation. So I'll start with a simple example. This is like the simple type 1 type of example. The goal, like I said, is to get y by itself so that our equation looks like our y equals mx plus b equation. Right now, it doesn't say y equals, it says y minus 8x equals. So what we want to do is take this minus 8x and get rid of it on this side and move it to the other side. How do I do that? So to do that, you have to do the inverse or the opposite of minus 8x, which is plus 8x. Oh, geez. There we go. Okay, so we do that once on this side, and if you like the line, helps you organize your work, go for it. Draw the line. I usually don't, but if it helps, go ahead. So minus 8x plus 8x is 0. So that means that term is gone on the left side, and we have just the y. And now on this side, we can't combine negative 5 plus 8x because the negative 5 does not have an x, so all I can do is write negative 5 plus 8x, which is great because that looks more like our y equals mx plus b, and that's what we wanted. Now you could just leave it like that, or if you prefer, you can actually rewrite it in the order so that the 8x comes first and the minus 5 or the negative 5 comes second, but you do not absolutely have to do that. You can just leave it the way that it was. Okay, and that's it for that. If you would like to pause and try these examples, you can. I'm just going to write the answers here so you can check your work and see how you did. Now for this second one, you could leave it like that, or you could just take out the 0 and just write y equals x. All right, example 2, this one's a little bit different than example 1. Same goal though, our goal is to get the y by itself, but in this problem, it's not y plus or minus something, it's y times something. So it's 2y. To get rid of the 2, we would need to divide by 2. Okay, well that's not too tricky, but what happens on the other side can be a little tricky. So on the other side, we normally only have one other term when we go to divide, but in this case we still have the 4x minus 6. You have to divide everything by 2. So that means 4x divided by 2, which is 2x, but you also have to divide 6 by 2, which is 3. So we're dividing this entire expression by 2. So you have to make sure that you divide both terms by 2. Biggest mistake is forgetting to divide everything by 2. But that's it. That's our answer. Y equals 2x minus 3. And that's in our y equals mx plus b form. Again, here's a couple more examples. I will write the answer if you want to pause and try them. You can. Now this first one, let me actually erase this. You can see the y is on the right side instead of the left, and that's fine. You can flip the whole thing around if that bothers you. Some people don't like to see it on the wrong side, but it actually doesn't matter. So you could leave it like that, or you could just flip it around. Just make sure that you don't flip around these. Just flip the y to the other side. And then this one, a little tricky because that's a -4. And if you divide everything by a -4, I guess I'll just show you how to do this one because this one's a little tricky. 4 divided by -4 is -1. And then here you have to be careful. It's -20, but -20 acts like a -20. Two negatives are going to give you a +5. So you can leave it like that, or you can get rid of the 1 and just make it a -x because that is the same thing. Okay, last type. This is the hardest because there's more than one thing you need to do. It's a kind of a combination of the first two examples that I showed you. So same goal. Goal is to get y by itself. Before I can divide by this 2 though, I need to get rid of the 3x. So to do that, I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. 3x minus 3x is 0. Now what's left is a minus 2y. Be careful not to drop that minus sign. And then we have 6 minus 3x. Okay, and then we just kind of talked about this in the last example. Now we want to divide everything by a -2. Divide this side by -2 and divide this side by -2. So that's y. And then 6 divided by -2 is -3. And then -3 divided by -2 gives you +1.5. You can write 1.5, or you can just leave it as 3/2. That's actually better for graphing purposes to leave it as a fraction, but we're not graphing this one. But it is actually easier to have your answer as a fraction than a decimal for graphing purposes, believe it or not. Okay, here's 2 other examples for you. Again, if you want to pause and try them, go for it. I am going to write the answers down, so if you're going to try them, pause it now. Okay, so like I said, the purpose of doing this is to make it easier for graphing. So I just want to show you an example of what I mean by that. So this says solve for y and then graph the line. So solve for y first. I'm going to add 2x to both sides to get the y term by itself. Minus 2x plus 2x, that's gone. 6y equals -6 plus 2x. So we just bring the 2x to the other side. And now we divide everything by 6. That gives us -1 plus 2x over 6, or 2/6x. Now I'm going to keep this as a fraction. However, I'm going to simplify it to 1/3. Now, when I said in the last slide that it's actually easier to leave it as a fraction than a decimal, that's for graphing purposes. So remember in our last lesson, the first thing we do when we graph is plot the y-intercept. So in this case, the y-intercept is -1, so let me put that there. And then we want to use the slope. So remember, to use the slope, it's the change in y over the change in x. If I had changed this from a fraction to a decimal, I get a repeating decimal, which is 0.3. 0.3 is not something easy to find on this graph because each space is counting by 1. So it's actually easier to keep this as a fraction because so y is a change of 1, that's positive, so that goes up 1. And then x is a change of positive 3, which goes to the right 3. So this is easier because we can actually just go nice whole number of spaces rather than trying to estimate where 0.3 repeating is. So I'll go up 1 over 3 and put a point there, and that's my line. So for once, maybe actually fractions are better than decimals. I know a lot of you like decimals better, but in this case it is actually easier to keep the fraction rather than change it to a decimal, especially if it's repeating or something other than a half. I'd say a half is maybe the only decimal that's reasonable when you're graphing a line. All right, so we'll end this video there for solving for y.